or attitudes probably that people held privately. I don't know. I never had that in my household. I never had those words and those attitudes expressed. So I didn't have them. But I know I heard the kids around me. But there was never any open hostility, because when you live in the area between two very different areas, you have to learn to get along. It's a luxury to live in the middle of one of those areas and have all these attitudes and, you know, have a chip on your shoulder. But when you live right where the two of them join, you're forced to sort of live in a third area, which is the mixture. And it's very nice. It's very, it's a good way to start your life.
Well, the people in that area, your childhood certainly impressed you. You shared them with all of us. Father Rivera. Was he really that lenient? You could actually see the line move at confession?
Yeah, Father, we had about 6 priests in the parish. Father Kelly, Father Ford was the pastor, Father Russell, Father Smith, and some of them came and went, and I don't remember the names, Father Daly and Father Halpern and Father Rivera, who was there primarily because there was starting to be more of a Spanish representation. I don't use words like Latino and Hispanic. I say what we grew up with, the Spanish people, you know. Spanish heritage. Somewhere in their mixed blood, there's Spain, so I call them Spanish people. Father Rivera was there to serve them and to pastor them, or I should say, to tend to their pastoral needs. And one of them was confession. And Father Rivera didn't understand. I mean, he understood English, but he didn't sound like he understood English. and we would go to Father Rivera because he was notoriously, that's probably not the right word, he was famously more lenient. And you would get a lighter sentence, a lighter penance in confession.
Sentence.
And you could see people would switch the line, people on Father Kelly's line, when Father Rivera would show up and, you know, they'd kiss the stole and put it on and go in the confessional, you would see people race and rush over to Father Rivera's line. Father Rivera, you know, I say, Hail Mary. He didn't question. Some of the priests, you know, they would question, so how did you touch yourself? How did you touch yourself, son? He didn't go into any of that, how I touched myself.
No, you just started.
You know, he didn't want that.
You just started doing a voice. You used to sit around the tape recorder and record these voices, didn't you?
Well, this was a turning point in my life, and it's one that people should know about. When I was a young boy, I was a mimic, and I could imitate people in the neighborhood, authority figures, teachers, shop owners, other parents, cops on the beat, and people on television. Yeah, I could do little imitations. They were largely imitations of other people doing imitations. That's how you learn to do Jimmy Cagney. You see another guy do it on stage, and you say, oh, okay, and you copy him. It's easier because they point out the highlights of speech. But neighborhood stuff. I was kind of the class clown in school, and then after school I was kind of like the neighborhood wise guy, one of the neighborhood wise guys on the street corner, and I would gather a little audience because I would put together little routines. I had little parodies that I did. I lifted things everyone steals from comedians when they're starting, so I would steal imitations in Humphrey Bogart and Jimmy Cagney and Peter Lorre, and I would do fake commercials that I had heard or read in Mad. Well, Mad Comics came along a little bit later. There was another magazine called 1,000 Jokes, and I put together little routines, and they would say, Georgie, hey, Georgie, do that thing about such, and I would stand up and do it, and it would come out differently each time, and I developed this ability to stand up in front of a group of people and get their attention and get their approval. That was important to me, apparently. When I was a little kid, I'd go to my mother's office and she'd say, imitate Mae West, do the imitations. And I would do the imitations for the ladies in her office, and they would laugh. And I noticed, I don't remember noticing this per se, but I must have noticed that this got me the attention of adults. Because don't forget, I was alone in that house most of the day. When I wasn't in school, I came home and I was alone. I got the attention of these adults, and I got their approval through their laughter. They were more or less saying, good boy, George, good going, way to go. Yes, he's good, he's cute. Ain't I cute, ain't I clever? That's what this job is. So as a youngster, I wanted to be a comedian. I was probably only 8 or 9 or 10 years old when I began to form an idea that I wanted to be in the movies like Danny Kaye and like Red Skelton. and I called that being an actor, but it was actually being a comedian. And pretty soon I found out the word comedian, and I wanted to be a comedian. And when I graduated from 8th grade, the last thing I graduated from, by the way, my mother asked me what I wanted, and one of the brothers at school, Brother Conrad, had told us that he can get a clergyman's discount on cameras. So I asked him if he could get a clergyman's discount on tape recorders. Now, this was 5 years after the Second World War. Tape recorders had come out as consumer items, but they were as big as a small Buick. They were large. They were like this big, and you had to buy them in a showroom up above the street. They were on sale in stores. I bought this big Webcor, long story, and I'm keeping it long. I used it to do voices and do little sketches and skits and fake radio shows and fake newscasts and commercials. And I used it to more or less train myself for the thing I wanted to do. My mother was very progressive to have bought me that as a graduation present. I mean, she was a far thinker to see that in me and go ahead and foster that and reward that. Even though she didn't want me to follow it, but she knew it was a healthy thing for me to do.
You've always been a planner.
Yeah,
you had this optimistic,
this
optimistic attitude that if you planned it well enough and you meant well, it's going to happen. You believe it.
Well, I would only plan things I felt, that obviously, that I wanted and thought I was qualified for. But this is the good example of this career planning. When I was a kid, I said, well, first I'll be. I wanted to be an actor. I called it actor because I saw them in the movies and I knew they were movie actors. So Danny Kaye and these guys, I thought actor. Okay, so first I'll be a stand-up comedian. And don't forget, when I was a kid, the only place stand-up comedians worked was nightclubs. Right. Those kind of really more or less sophisticated places where you saw in the movies, and people danced and there was a singer and there was a comic and I never got into those places. I was too young, and it wasn't in my world. So I knew about comedians from radio and from television later, but movies when I was a youngster. So I aimed at that, and I thought, well, the way to get there would be to first get into radio. That would be my first move, because then I could practice using my voice and I could learn to speak and do a lot of these things without an audience directly in front of me, which is the usual thing in radio. They're not sitting in the studio. And therefore I wouldn't be as nervous or afraid, and I could kind of build up my confidence, and then I could become a stand-up comedian, because by then there were further venues for comedians. I thought, then I can be a stand-up comedian, and then I can go, then if I'm really good at that, then they have to let me in the movies. And that was the way I looked at it. They had to let me in the movies. And that was the plan, and it became more sophisticated as I went through 13, 14, 15 years and started to actually think of ways to go about it.
Now, you actually revealed your life's plan in, what, you're 11 years old?
Yeah, when I was 11, it was 5th grade, Sister Nina, and I saw her, by the way, just about 3 or 4 years ago. She came to a show of mine up in Wisconsin. Yeah, she was 81, sharp as can be. Sharp, thin, quick, She said, yeah, you lived on the top of the hill. They remembered me for other reasons, but she actually remembered that I lived right up the block from the school. 5th grade, Sister Nina, I used to sing at the club meeting. They had once a week, they'd have a club meeting, and there'd be new business and old business and all that kind of stuff. And then there'd be the entertainment. You could do an invitation, you could bring in your banjo, play the piano, sing a song. I would always stand up and sing a song. I sang Mañana in her class. Mañana, mañana, mañana is soon enough for me. And, some of the guys thought it was goofy, and some of them liked it. But in Sister Nina's class, we were assigned to write an autobiography. I think 5th grade is about time to look back on your life. So, part of the autobiography was the last page, and that page was what I'm going to be. And I said, I want to be either an actor, announcer, disc jockey, imitator, I guess I called it, or an actor. That's when it started with actor. Actor, comedian, imitator, announcer, or something like that. So there it was, right in front of everyone. And there was a nice amalgam. You can tell that the thing I wanted most was attention. that was really what that sentence was all about. You know, ain't I cute, ain't I clever, look at me.
Well, you went to the Army, you got that out of the way.
Air Force, yeah.
Air Force, sorry. And luckily there was a radio station just off base.
Yeah.
It was in Shreveport, right?
Shreveport, Louisiana, which sounds like a kind of a dopey place for this, actually was a very hot radio market. They had 9 radio stations at that time and was very competitive. And top 40 radio was just beginning, and rock and roll was just beginning, because Elvis Presley's first hit came out in I believe 55 or 56. And there I was right on the cusp of all of that. And I wanted to be this announcer, disc jockey guy, when I got out of the Air Force. My plan was to go in the Air Force, do 4 years from 17 to 21, get out at the age of 21, and use the GI Bill to go to school to learn to be an announcer and a disc jockey, so that I would be learning when I was 21. Now, I got in there, and when I was 18, I was in an amateur play downtown in Shreveport, in a very good community theater company, by the way, Shreveport Little Theater. And I was doing a play called Golden Boy, and in it was Joe Monroe. And Joe Monroe was famous as a radio personality in Shreveport. I was out on the base. I was in the Air Force out on the base. And in my off time, I would do this play. And Joe was a famous radio personality. He did the morning show. He did the afternoon drive time. And I didn't know he owned the station. So it was a really great station, KJOE, K-J-O-E in Shreveport.
That wasn't the clue?
Yeah, well, you know, there was a slight inkling in my mind, but I didn't know that he was the outright owner. Actually, he was 51%. Now, that station was #1 in a 9-station market, in spite of the fact that it was a daytime-only station. They had to come on the air every morning again at sunrise, turn the transmitter on, and gain back all the listeners who had tuned out at sundown. There are some stations at low power. This was a 1,000 watts, and daytime only, but it was #1, and it had about a 50% share of the market.
And this is what...
now, we're 9 stations competing with 8 out of the stations. They had 50% of the listeners on.
I was going to say, this is what it sounded like if you lived in Shreveport. Alex, you want to roll that?
Give me Michelle.
Yeah,
George Carlin is on the air, the smoothest record man anywhere. Get set to listen, so here we go on the George Carlin Show. Okay, then, Solid, how you doing? Lots of music coming up for you between now and 5:45. Got the brand new Everly Brothers record, and we'll be playing both sides of it for you. In addition to listening to Elvis's latest, came out this week, and we'll get things started with the new one by Chuck Berry. Stick around, good things happening here on 1480 at Carlin's Corner.
Yeah.
You didn't even talk up the whole bed.
No, I didn't use it up. I liked when the brass came back in. I used to let the brass come back in to build. Those are great
Carlin's
jingles.
Corner.
Listen to that band, huh? Pretty good band.
Yeah, well, if you went to the next market, it's the same band with a different set of...
That's right. Yeah, the jingles were done in Dallas. It was a big jingle mill.
So there you were on the radio. Now, was that the first time that you really got that feeling that, of not power really, but hey, I'm reaching people that don't know me? I don't know.
Yeah, well, surely. Yeah, I mean, just by definition, of course. But the way the mechanics of the thing happened, I was in this play, and Joe Monroe was in it, so I said to Joe, hey, Joe, I wonder if I could come down and watch you do your radio show, because I'm going to be a disc jockey when I get out of the Air Force. And that was my first step, being in the... So I didn't bother telling him about comedian and all that. I'm going to be a disc jockey, and I'd like to watch your show and pick up some tips and see how you do. He said, yeah. He says, come on down. I still didn't know he was the owner. I got there and watched his show, and he went off the air at sundown. Let's say it was 6:15 that night. It changes. It gets later and later as the summer goes on. And when the show was over and the station was off the air, he said, go on in the control room there. I'll stay here at the board. Go in the control room there, and the announcer's booth room, and read some of this news copy and read a couple of these local commercials. So I brought him in there and I read them, my best, assumed announcer voice. I was 18. I still had my New York, I guess. Well, I had a non-regional accent that I had been kind of cultivating since I had the tape recorder, but it wasn't perfect. I still had some New York vowels that gave me away. But I read for him, and he liked it well enough that he gave me a job on the spot, starting me at, it was 60 cents an hour, which he knew, well, he knew cheap labor when he saw it. 60 cents, but I forgot, I was in the Air Force. I was eating free and sleeping free and getting a little money too. So it was fine with me. I would have worked free, obviously. The job was weekends only, Saturday and Sunday, and 5-minute newscast. We had 5 minutes of news every hour, 5:55 music, 5 minutes of news. Reading the newscast, the ones that were not sponsored. The sustaining newscast. They were it was either for the U.S. bonds or join the Navy or some kind of, drive carefully, those kind of things. So I learned the weekends reading those newscasts, how to read on the air and everything. And pretty soon I got a noontime spot where they played nicer music. It wasn't top 40. They played kind of like nice music. Joe was a musician, actually. So that's how it all began for me. And I saved all that time. When I got out of the Air Force, and I got kicked out a year early.
I was going to say, you keep saying when I got out of the Air Force, but the fact is, you were kicked out of 3 high schools.
That's right.
Kicked out of choir, kicked out of summer camp.
Altar Boys, summer camp,
Altar Boys.
and Boy Scouts.
And
that's called... Yeah, that's...
And the Air Force.
That's called the hat trick.
Now, what was the terminology the Air Force used?
The Air Force discharge. That was it was a general discharge under honorable condition. It wasn't a BCD, a bad conduct, and it wasn't a dishonorable. So I got all my pay and allowances, but they let me out early because they were looking to cut manpower, and they looked in the areas of people who were being less productive than others. And I had stopped. I was in a very elite maintenance squadron. We had to have the highest IQs going into the Air Force of anyone to get into K systems. We ran and maintained the bomb navigation system. They were analog computers and radar systems and optics. We repaired them, and that was a very advanced system made by a lot of different. It was in the Boeing 747, which was the medium bomber. And I got out of the maintenance area. Once I got the job in the Air Force, they thought, well, that's pretty good. We got a guy doing kind of public relations for the base. This is good for the Air Force base to have a guy who's being productive and not just knocking up local girls, So I got out of my career field, as they call it, and because I was not productive in their minds, and so I could get out 11 months early. And I got out at 20, and at 20, I had my GI Bill of Rights, and I had 3 years experience in the field I wanted, and I had beat the game.
Very good.
Yes. It was a good start. It was a great start. It let me know that, man, you can make some breaks for yourself.
And the next stop was KXOL, and you met in Fort Worth.
I met Jack Burns in Boston on radio up there, but I wasn't suited for that station. It was a network station with soap operas and stuff, and I went up there because you always want to get to a bigger market. When you're in radio, the first thing you do is you start recording your voice. You start taping to make your tape. You start making your audition tape so you can get to a bigger market. There's more money, more exposures, you can move on. It's a farm system, So I wanted to get to Boston. I thought, well, I'll go to that station. I had a friend who got me in there. The guy was in the sales department. And I figured, well, I can make a base there, and I can look around Boston for a top 40 station to go to. But it never worked out. But I met Jack Burns there. We roomed together with a third guy, Ron, and hit it off very well comedically. And I lost that job. I got kicked out of there for taking the news unit, the mobile news unit, from Boston to New York on the weekend just to buy some grass. Right. That was what I did. So, once the twig is bent, so grows the tree. And there I was.
Well, wait a minute. You didn't go there because the pot was so good in New York. You didn't know anybody in Boston, right?
I didn't know anybody in Boston, and I wanted to be with my buddies down in New York.
Right.
So we were 5 of us driving all through Harlem looking for grass because we knew where to go. 135th Street was the stop. We had certain stops we could make to buy grass, and we're driving around in this thing it says on the outside, it says WEZE, NBC News, and we're looking for grass, and we're all like guys, in our early 20s. So it was a lot of fun, but. Got fired from there, was out of a job for a while, and then I got called down to Fort Worth where another guy from radio in Shreveport had moved on, a sales director, and he wanted me for their station in Fort Worth, so he brought me down there. So #1 station, I got the homework shift, 7 to midnight, answered my own phones, took all my own requests and dedications, and suddenly one day Jack Burns showed up from Boston. He says, I'm going out to give Hollywood one last chance at me. That was his attitude, which is the way to look at things. And his tires were bald, so luckily a news job had opened that day, and he got that job, and he was my nighttime newsman. And you know the rest. We went down to an after-hours comedy joint, which was really a coffee house called The Cellar in Fort Worth, and we did impromptu sketches every night, impromptu skits and two-man stuff. And it was so successful, we left radio. We said, screw this. You know, we had great jobs. We were making like $300, $400 a week. It's 1960, and we're in Fort Worth, a good market, and we could have gone on from there, but we decided to quit radio because we'll go to Hollywood and become stars. Because we have this filthy act that we did. Filthy. It was just, and in those days, filthy comedy didn't have a market for it at all. And there we were, how naive, but how wonderful when you're in that age period. To just get in my newly bought Dodge Dart Pioneer with the tinted windows and the AM/FM radio and drive to Los Angeles on spec. You know, on speculation, we had about $300, and we got lucky out there. We got lucky. I got lucky every time I turned around.
Well, when you went out there, you got a job at a club.
Yeah, no, what happened was this. First, we went out there and we were looking to see how we could get into show business. We knew we had this act we had written, and in the daytime we'd write stuff and learn. It's terrible. So we would go to places and look at other people, and we would hang around Dino's on the Strip and figure Frank Sinatra might come in. We hung around the Brown Derby one night, and Rock Hudson came floating through, and we were just using up our money. And one day we went back to the apartment, and the rest of our money had been stolen out of the sock drawer. Good hiding place, George. And we had no money, so we thought, well, gee, we hadn't counted on that. And we had vowed not to work, just to go straight into show business. We didn't want jobs, none of that bellhop stuff, none of that car hop, none of that stuff. We won't go into radio out there. But what happened was the only thing we knew was radio. And the only thing we really felt we deserved was radio. The second biggest market in the country. I mean, it was sheer lunacy to expect to just get into that market. But we went around. We went first to KFWB, #1 in the market, top 40 station. And we didn't have tapes or anything. They didn't want us. So we're walking along. We see this radio station, KDAY, right near Hollywood and Vine. It's Selma and Vine, in between Sunset and Vine and Hollywood and Vine. We walked in there, and that's where my star on the walk is now, out in Hollywood.
Really?
I had them put it out in front of that radio station. It's kind of nice. We went in there, and they were looking for a morning comedy team. I mean, it's just all luck, you know? You just get lucky and you're on a roll. They were looking for guys like us. We did a tape for them. They loved us. They called us the Wright Brothers instead of by our real names. They called us the Wright Brothers. But it did a big publicity campaign, ads in Variety, full-color ads and everything, and put us on the air. And here we are on the air about, it would only have been about 2 months after we got there. And it was just sheer madness, there we were.
That wasn't good enough for you?
No. What we did was still work on the act. We're going to work on the act because this is only a stepping stone, And now we're making about $500 a week each, and that's good, and we're great. But we're practicing this act after hours. This was also a daytime station, by the way. Even though it was a 50,000 watt and it had a big signal out on the West Coast, it was a daytimer. And we went off the air at sundown, and in the studio, we would work on these routines. We were getting serious now. And nearby, about 2 blocks away, was a coffee house. That was the way for us to get in. They were now coffee houses. It was the era of the beatniks. And coffee houses liked offbeat entertainment. And we knew we could get in there and do our stuff for the owner maybe and get a shot. Just get a hootenanny shot. Get a single shot, And we went over there. He liked us and he hired us for 2 weeks. And we're still rehearsing our act, and and a guy came walking through the studio because it was an office building and you could see the studios on your left and there were little offices here. He was a song plugger. He was a guy who used to do PR for songwriters and stuff and record labels. And he saw us, and he used to be the road manager for Rowan and Martin. And he says, I think you guys could make it, you know? So we gave him, he became our manager. We went in this little coffee house. They held us over for 6 weeks. Lenny Bruce came in and saw us. Mort Saul came in and saw us. And based on that, Lenny Bruce, we got a contract with GAC, one of the biggest agencies in the country. They had New York offices, Chicago, and Beverly Hills offices. And we got into nightclubs where we quit radio again. We quit. We said, no, sorry about that. We got something to do. And we went on and began a career that worked out very well. 2 years together. We were on The Tonight Show with Jack Parr that October. We drove out of Shreveport in March. We drove out of Shreveport in March, and that October we were on NBC television at night on the biggest show for a comedian. It's just stupid, you know. But man, it can happen. It can happen, you know. Yeah, thank you.
I've heard the term "luck of the Irish." Maybe it started with you.
I know it.
Well,
it's just, I think the luck comes from heredity. You know, that's the first draw you get of luck, good luck or bad luck.
Jack Burns, by the way, if you're not old enough to remember, went on to do Burns and Schreiber, who you may have seen on Ed Sullivan Show, doing the taxi cab.
Jack was the boogie. That's the bigot in the back, and or Avery was the cab. Yeah, well, you know, these commies out there, the commies, you know. he did that character very beautifully, and he had a good career. And he played Warren when Don Knotts retired from Mayberry RFD. He played Warren. He was the new deputy, and he's had a good career writing and producing.
Now you went on to become a solo act.
Yeah, each of us wanted to eventually become solo.
Ed Sullivan.
Yeah.
How in the world did that happen?
Well, that's a part of the process as you become known. This was the era of variety television. And there were two important syndicated TV shows at that time. Merv Griffin and had a show, it was a 90-minute nighttime show, and it was syndicated as opposed to being on the network. And so was Mike Douglas. Mike Douglas had a daytime show that was syndicated, both out of Westinghouse Westinghouse Television. And I did about 15 Merv Griffins, and I did about 15 Mike Douglases. By the time the networks noticed me, the producers for the network, the guy who produced the Jimmy Dean show, they got me on there, and I did a monologue on there, and then they kept me over, and I did another monologue the next week, and there I was on ABC television. And from there, those same producers did a summertime show the next year. It took Andy Williams' place in the Kraft Summer Music Hall. Andy was on year-round, not year-round, but everything except the summer, the TV season. Right. And we took his place during the summer, calling it the Summer Music Hall, with John Davidson. And I was the house comedian and the writer. And from there, that's when Ed Sullivan notices you, or the Carson people notice you, or Hollywood Palace, or whatever other variety show you were going to get on. There were a lot of variety shows then. Carol Burnett, you know, Jimmy Rogers, a lot of them.
Do you remember meeting Ed Sullivan the first time?
Oh yeah, sure.
Tell us about
he was just what he looked like. He was, you know. But he took I held out. They wanted me on that show. Here I am, you know, still now in my early developmental stage, although I was on national television a lot. And they wanted me on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I resisted because I had heard that they were very brutal with comedians about cutting their time at the last minute. You have 6 minutes, they come and tell you to cut a minute because the monkeys went long, you know. Sorry, but the baboon went long, you're gonna have to cut. So I didn't want that because I did set pieces. I didn't do a series of jokes that I could cut 5 of them out to take out a minute. I did a piece that I had memorized that was 6 minutes long, and that was it. And you couldn't take out anything. So I didn't want them going around doing that to me. That would usually happen, you know, you have dress rehearsal in the afternoon, and then you would have broadcast at night, live, 8 o'clock. And it would happen between dress and air. They would tell you to maybe cut a minute. And then between air, when they started at 8, and the time you went on, 8:40 or something maybe, they would come tell you to take out 30 seconds more or something. So I didn't want that. I was fearful enough doing live television. So I finally gave in, and I wound up doing 11 Ed Sullivan shows. And I wound up really writing some very poor material. I mean, my standard really fell off, because there you are, you're offered 2 more Sullivan shots, and the money is great, and you know the exposure is important, and you want to, do that. So, you go ahead and you write a piece, and it's not quite what it was.
Well, yeah, but I was surprised going back listening. You did the hair poem. The one other
That's
Sullivan shot.
toward the end of the show.
Yeah, the hair poem and the thing about the
America the
ecology.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was surprised. Did they give you any flack